Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special VOC exclusive interview with Ruth Johnson. She is the daughter of Reverend Robert G. Johnson, widely known as the last American missionary to serve in Chinland. Born in Mandalay, Ruti has a deep personal connection to Chinland and its people. In 1965, when she was just 17, her family left Burma ahead of General Ne Win's 1966 expulsion of all foreigners, which followed the rise of his socialist regime. While Pi Ruti did not return to Burma in 1999, her father, sister, brother, and their spouses did. At the same time, Pi Ruti and her mother participated in the centenary celebrations held in Washington, D.C. In 2015, she finally had the opportunity to visit Chinland, traveling with her brother Deki and his wife. Together, they journeyed through Mandalay, Kalemyo, Kampet, Tidim, Flam, Hakka, Tantang, and Nyarlaw, a profound and emotional homecoming, warmly received by the people of the land her family had long served and loved. Today, we are honored to speak with Pi Ruti once again. This interview will serve as a lasting record for the Chin people and the future generations. Welcome, Pi Ruti. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us.
Alom. Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, could you please introduce your family to us? Where were you born, and could you share a bit about your background and upbringing? Zangfa natin kapi lai holte kan introduction zangka rakan simpiako so tia kanin noldu.
Hello. Kematsu kanula kapa to 1945, 46 akan light lang and pan. Deki ka utu kum katlang tesi ama atsu anitungu May 30th asi matniakan light langa and pan pasabik na kasi Gatesu 1947 kafin Mandalay. I was born in Mandalay. I was born in a schoolhouse because the general hospital had been bombed during the war. And so I was born there. My parents, it took them 17 days to get to Mandalay from Hakka. And that was with my mother walking. And then they carried her on a litter. And then they rode in a truck. And then she went on a river boat and finally got to Mandalay. And that's when I was born. It took 17 days to get there. And then they came back to Hakka. That was my first time in Hakka. I will show you a picture. This is the Carson house, Carson Hostel, and that was where we first lived. And then later on, this is the main house that we lived in. When we first moved, when my parents first got to Hakka, this house was not livable. It had bomb holes in it. The roof was leaking and everything. So they fixed it, and then they moved there, I think in 1948. This is a picture of the first Christmas feast, 1947, December. And this is a picture of my mother and me and Van Oipa, Ramhun, and that was our kitchen. This is a picture of, this one is Meripa, this one, Meripa, to Mahitsu Van Oipa, to Ramtiao Darmangpa. And those people stayed with our family the whole time we were there. This is a picture of how we traveled after we got the Jeep. We could take it as far as Lumbang, I think it was. And then after that, we had to go on horses. So my family, I have an older brother. His name is Deki, or Richard. And I have a younger sister named Martha. She goes by Tata, and I was Ruti. We also, this is a picture of me, and this one right here is Mary. This one here is Tumtlem. She's in America now. And this one is Martha. When I was young, I also had a monkey, Chico. Somebody brought him. And so my childhood, I spent all my time with my friends. I grew up there. I didn't speak English until I was about 4. We came back to America for furlough. And then my parents said, you have to learn English if you want to talk to your grandmother and grandfather. So I learned English, but I only spoke Chin. Chin was my first language, and all my friends spoke Chin. I didn't see any need for speaking English, but my parents made a rule after a while that we had to speak English at the dinner table, because they were afraid that we wouldn't learn English and know how to talk with our friends when we went to school someplace else. When I was in Hakka, I also learned how to weave. And some of the things that I remember most about my childhood was all my friends. And there was no crime. We were never afraid to go anywhere. We were very, very fortunate. Um, us kids would go out into the woods. We'd go tinglam, which is getting wood. We'd go looking for tinkepar orchids, which I love. I still love to this day, and I have many orchids in my sunroom. And we would go down to Haitan and get kulu, little berries, and dingkok, which were wonderful. And we'd go ngashingdoi at Timit, which was fun. There's a story there, though. We went fishing one time, and I picked up. We all wore our longis, and I thought that there was a ripped longi floating in the river, and it turned out that it was a big snake. I picked it up, and I was so scared I threw it away. And some of the guys that were with us ended up killing it, and they took it home because it was a big one. It was fucking big. And I think they called it lim. Is that a python? I'm not sure. Anyway, it was a very big snake. I was very afraid of snakes. I used to have bad dreams about snakes being under my bed. And, I didn't like snakes. And to this day, I don't like snakes. We used to play a lot of games like jackboo. Do you know what jackboo is? Jackboo is it's a seed like this big, and we used to do it on our front veranda. And then Nop, you know what Nop is?
I have no clue.
Nop is a very dangerous game. Nop, you take a piece of wood about this big and you sharpen it on both sides. And then you take another stick and you hit it, and it goes up in the air, and then you hit it again. And you hope that you don't hit somebody in the eye or something. But yeah, we used to play that. I used to love climbing trees. We had a lot of trees on the mission compound, and my friends and I would climb up there and swing back and forth at the very top of the tree. I I think if my parents knew all those things that I did, they'd be very scared, and they'd probably scold me, but they didn't know most of that. They were too busy doing their work. But I never had a problem.
Those were like dangerous sports.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
But our compound, where our house was, there was a big yard in there. Now it's all concreted over, but there was a big yard, and we used to play soccer on there. We had so much fun. We really had a lot of fun.
Very interesting, very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so your father was known as the last missionary in Chinland. Could you share a brief biography of him? What led him to choose Chinland? Was it a personal calling or an assignment?
Oh, sure. Um, my father was uh, my father was born in 1915, and he had a sister that was born the next year. In 1918, the Spanish flu came through, and his mother died. So he was very young. He was only 3 years old, and his sister was two. And his father didn't have a lot of money. He was in real estate and he couldn't take care of the two kids. So they were parceled out to different relatives. But from a very early age, and my father lived with Methodists, okay? At a very early age, my dad was convinced that he was going to be a preacher. In fact, he used to, preach to people when he was like 15 and 16 and so on. And he became a Baptist, and he went to Wheaton College. Um, and when he was at Wheaton, he met my mother because his sister was living with a family in another city where my and that guy that she was living with was the pastor of the church that my mom went to. And so my mom and Alice Jane were very good friends, and that's how my dad met my mother. And and he went on to seminary. He was planning. They'd applied to the mission field. They got married in I think 1941. They applied to the mission field, and they were getting ready to go, and the war broke out. So all the plans for everybody going someplace changed. And he was a chaplain in the United States Navy in the Pacific. And my mother taught school while he was there. And as far as when they first, right after the war was over, a few months later, they got on a boat ship and they went first to India. They thought they were going to be missionaries in Assam. In fact, they stayed in Assam for a while until all of a sudden Franklin Nelson came. He was the missionary to Didim, and he came and he said, "You're supposed to be in the Chin Hills," you know. So he said, "I'm here to pick you up." So they packed up everything and he drove them through Assam, I think Imphal, Kohima, those areas, and down to Didim. And they stayed in Didim for quite a while. Now, my father and mother didn't know any Chin at all. And that's where your grandfather comes in. Lalhin was sent to Didim, and he taught my parents Chin. At least he started out and taught my parents Chin. And so from the very beginning, your grandfather was very involved with my parents. Um, now, let's see. So going to the Chin Hills was not his real, it wasn't the thing that he started out with at first, but that's where he ended up. And my parents truly loved the Chin state.
We also learned that he played multiple roles as a missionary, architect, and Bible translator. So, how did those responsibilities shape your understanding of faith, service, and identity growing up?
Well, you're right. He was a missionary. He wasn't trained as an architect at all. He read popular mechanics. He was a good student and he studied all those things. And he was quite determined that he knew how to do these things. But in all honesty, he'd never done anything like that before. And a little bit later, we'll talk about the church and how that building went. And but when he first went over there, uh, they Bible translation was the first thing that they wanted to do, besides teaching Bible students. And my mother set up some teaching things with the women and all that. But Um, the Bible translation, he didn't completely finish. He worked with David Van Beek. And after all the missionaries were asked to leave, then my father left all the translation to David Van Beek, Stephen Bach, and he did a wonderful job.
He also spent many years, obviously, writing the history of the American Baptist Chin Mission. What did that project mean to him, and how did it affect your family?
My father wrote so many notes. He kept notes for everything. He had a diary. I mean, to this day, he wrote another book too on the back road to Mandalay. I mean, it's like, how do you remember all that? But in all honesty, he kept notes and he wrote everything down, what he had for dinner and so on, So the idea of writing a book about the American Baptist work in Chin. He that had been a goal of his for a long, long time, and it was 2 volumes. I mean, it was each volume is like this big, it's huge, and he spent so many years working on that. But he and my mother worked on it. They self-published it, and it's a very the first book goes into all the history up to well, with the Carsons and so on. All that early history was in the first volume. The second volume was more about the more modern church.
Speaking of church, your father built a church in Hakka, or we call it Lumbyakin, which translate, you can call it the church built with rocks. Can you tell us about this church, how it was constructed, and what significance it holds for the community?
It's a magnificent church. I believe that you don't need a building to have a good church. However, the stone church, the Lumbyakin, is beautiful. It's very modern looking for that time too, and he had a great vision for it. He started building it in 1960, and when he left in 1966, it wasn't completed. It got finished after he left. But I can tell you some stories from the beginning part of it because I was there too. They cleared the land, and my father found out that there was some good rocks at Lungtravar, which is past Zolbuk, going towards where I don't know, the road going that way. And um, my dad bought a big truck, and my father's Swedish, Swedish background. And so his favorite colors were blue and yellow. And he painted this old lorry blue and yellow. So anybody could tell that it was the one that he did. And they'd haul rocks, and there were so many volunteers, women, children, anybody would come, and with um, hammers, break the rocks apart for the good footing, all the footing. And that was all donation, volunteer work. And then when they started building it, um, it was piece by piece. My dad had never done anything like this before either, but like I said, he'd read a lot, so he kind of had an idea of what to do. Um, and when it came time to putting the trusses up at the top of the building, that was a very big challenge because they didn't have any mechanical equipment. It was all done by hand, and they'd push it up, and then they'd push it up, push it up, push it up all the way up to the top. And nobody got injured during this whole time. I think one guy smashed his thumb. That was it, which is incredible, you know. But probably one of the harder parts was the rose window. Have you seen the pictures? Have you
Yes.
been to church? Okay.
Yeah.
The rose window, um, there's a lot of meaning in it, 39 and 12 and so on. And it took him a long time to figure out how to make that rose window that it would stay together, and then move it up to the top of that church. And so got it done. And it turned out beautifully. I mean, that's a beautiful, beautiful church.
Because your father did so many things for Chinland, what would be like if you could share one story that best captures your father's spirit or legacy, what would that be?
Okay. I there's the Swedes have a saying that they're stubborn. Okay. Stubborn Swede. And Franklin Nelson used to always tease my dad and tell him, "You're just a stubborn Swede." But what happened was that um, when you're saying he's stubborn, it's not so much he didn't give up. He didn't give up on anything. He always tried real hard to find a solution to it. And he was a very innovative type person. He could try to figure things out. And I'd say he never he had a very good heart towards the Chins. He did not give up when there were times were difficult and things got tough. He didn't give up. I would say that's his claim to fame.
Yes. And also, I want to ask you about your mother.
Yeah,
She came with her family, so she wasn't born in Chinland, so this is like a foreign country for her. So, how did your mother adapt to life as the spouse of a missionary in Chinland? What are your memories of her experiences and feelings during that time?
my mother was a lovely lady. She adapted well. However, she had difficulty because it was so different. She lived in a small town in Illinois. She had never been out of the United States. And all of a sudden, she's on a trip going to where they think it's going to be Assam in India. And then it's like, nope, you're going to go to Chin. And there aren't any good roads, and there's no store. And you have to take everything that you need for a whole year because you can't come back to the store and buy things. So all of a sudden, my mother had to be very creative and try to figure out how much rice, how much salt, how much sugar, how much flour, all those things that would be needed. Also, she wanted to plant a garden so that we could have fresh vegetables. Um, I want to say that she wasn't afraid, but I think there were times when she just really, really wished that there was somebody that she could speak to in English. She missed not being able to speak in English, but she learned Chin. She had some very good friends in Hakka, and she adapted very well. And after she came back to the States, you know, her heart was always in Burma. She loved everything about the Chin Hills and her friends. She missed all of that very much.
She also taught like a lot of kids when it comes to like music and hymns and things like that, correct?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. She translated a lot of the hymns into Chin. She taught Sunday school. She did women's meetings. She did guilds for young girls. She teach them how to sew. We had groups that came together for that. And she ran a dispensary. She wasn't a nurse. She didn't know too much about that, but um, she bought medicines and she gave medicines out to people. And I remember one time that there was a Mary News lady that was helping out. She slit her foot when she was chopping wood, and the axe went through her foot. And my mother packed it with sulfa. She ground up sulfa and wrapped up the foot and everything, and she survived. It came out very well. There was another man that had been mauled by a bear in the low in the a low, and she took care of him too. Um, and she always wanted the Chins to sing, especially the women. I mean, the Chins singing was just beautiful. And she particularly liked the a cappella, the way the Chins sang it, with the soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Oh, so beautiful. And she loved that.
Wonderful. She's a very tough woman.
Yeah, she was. She was. She lost a baby there too.
Oh,
I had a brother named Peter that was born prematurely. And my father was on a trip. He wasn't even there. And she had been in Tidham. And so the baby was born, but he did not survive even the day. So he was buried in Tidham. Um, and in 2015, when my brother and I went back to Burma, we stopped and did him and tried to find his grave, but of course it's all gone by now. There was nothing there. But they, there is a plaque in the missionary grave in Hakka that commemorates my brother. His name was Peter. He was born in 1950.
so Chinland was and still is a remote and politically unstable region. What challenges did your family face there, and how did your parents help you cope with that?
Well, for when it became politically unstable, I was actually in school in India. And so I wasn't even in Burma at the time, but that made it particularly difficult because I knew there were things going on. I got a letter from my parents and said things were not looking good, and they weren't sure, what was going to happen and so on. And we had vacation time from November, December, and then in January I had to go back to school in India. But um, when I came home, I saw that um, my parents' bedroom had wood planks, from that were going to be used for building the church, and they had stacked them all up because there was fighting um, in the town, and so they had put that up for their safety. Later on, when it sounded definitely like um, the people were going to be asked to leave, my mother sent me a package. And I was graduating from high school in 1965, and my parents sent me a package. They weren't able to come over for my graduation because they wouldn't have been able to get back in. But they sent a package to me through Mizoram, and I got the package. And in it, my mother had put some jewelry and sewed it in the seams, for a longi. And so I she got some of her jewelry out that way. It was precious things from her mother and so on that she didn't want to lose. Um, and when my parents got ready to leave, it was unfortunate because my sister also came over and went to school in India. And that was just in 1965. She was never able to, they didn't let her come back into Burma. They refused her visa. So here, my parents were in Burma. My sister she went on to Thailand. My mother was sick at the time. So she went to Thailand and stayed with my sister and got some medical care and then came back to the States. And so she got care, and it turned out that they, when she was in Burma, they said, "We think you have cancer." It turned out that that wasn't the case. She had hepatitis and she had amoebic dysentery and I don't know what other things, but she was quite sick.
So, from that to coming back to the US, how did you adjust your life in the United States? And please tell us about the education journey here in the United States. Did you ever feel out of place or curious about the life in the US compared to the upbringing in Chinland?
Well, I have to tell you, when I lived, my mother homeschooled me. She was a school teacher anyway, so she taught all of us until about seventh grade, sixth grade. And seventh grade, I went to uh, America for for furlough. And then 8th grade through 12th grade, I was in India. And so when I was getting ready to come back to the States, I first went to Burma, and I I was very lucky to get in. I got all the way up to Hakka, and of course that was May, right? And then, rainy season starts June, July. I had to come back to the United States to go to school, and I had been accepted into nursing school in Illinois. So when I was, this kind of is going into another question you had, but my trip away from Hakka was very memorable because it was in the middle of the rainy season, and there were landslides, and my father took me as far as Kalemio, but before we got there was such a huge landslide that we couldn't take the Jeep any farther. And so we had to walk about 12 miles. And I lost my panuts, my sandals. I lost them in the mud because I was going up to like my middle of my leg in mud, and the rain was coming up from underneath so hard. No umbrella worked. We were drenched. Anyway, that was my trip leaving Hakka and the Chin State. So that was memorable. We had to climb our way through trees and so on. But I have to tell you, I learned a lot of independence because I traveled by myself a lot, going back from India to Burma by myself. At first, my brother was there, but then he wasn't. He came to the States. And so I was used to traveling by myself, but I did get together with a friend of mine from high school, and we traveled together and arrived in New York, and I missed my plane because it was a different, I missed my plane. And I had no way of, I didn't know how to call anybody because I didn't know how to use telephones. I had to ask somebody how to use a telephone. And I'm sure it looked very strange because I looked American, I sounded American, but I didn't know the basic things. And so there was adjustments there. When I got to Chicago, of course, Chicago is a very busy place, and I wasn't used to traffic. And I'd try to wait until there weren't any cars coming to cross the street, for instance. And if you know Chicago, that doesn't work very well. Um, but eventually I got used to those things. And I also really missed speaking in Chin. I used to dream in Chin. I dreamt in Chin. And I didn't have anybody to speak Chin to. The only people, my brother, he was in college, he didn't have time for me. my 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 parents, when they came, I could talk to them in Chin, but there were no Chins that lived in the States at that time. And then after a while, yes, there were. And so it was so much fun to be able to talk Chin again to friends and people. But I kind of had to learn some of it back again. I'd forgotten some of it.
When did you get another chance to like start speaking Hakka uh, after that?
When? Oh boy. Um, let's see. It was probably, I moved to California after I went to nursing school. I went to college, got my degrees, and I went to California and I worked as a nurse there. And while I was there, I was able to make some contact with some Chins, and I could speak some with that. But and then people would come and visit my parents, and because they moved out to California too in 1988. I think they moved out in 1988. And people would, there were a number of Chins that came to the States from 1988 on because of all the disruption and problems in Burma. And at that time, there were a lot more people I could talk to and meet and renew friendships. And now my friend Tatum
Mm.
lives in Maryland. You know, my friend Mary's sister Margaret lives in Seattle. They're people that I knew then. Yeah.
So you talk to them occasionally.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Very nice.
yeah.
Because you were born in Mandalay, Burma, and you were raised in Chin State, Hakka. Like now, looking back, you want to give back for the Chinland and so on. So you eventually returned to Hakka and started like a nonprofit to give it back, right? So what inspired you, and what has the journey been like?
Okay. Well, actually, I started that. My husband and I, and we sought some help from some Kenneth Van Beek and Ruth Johnson also helped us, and we started that I think 2013, and that came from a recognition that there was a lot that people needed help with. I used to get requests, I mean, when in the years before that, I used to collect clothing and stuff like that from friends and send parcels out. After a while, that got too expensive. It was way too expensive to send it, but then I discovered that the people would have to pay taxes, would have to pay money to get the boxes too, and it didn't seem like that made sense. And most of the stuff I was sending, probably I wasn't sure how much it was being used anyway. So I kind of put that on the back burner. My husband and I decided that we would put some money towards this, and and then I started trying to raise money. I'd go around and talk to people. And our idea was to develop a nonprofit where we'd send money over there and let people, do a garden or raise pigs or raise mittens, um, any of those kinds of things. And so we did that. Um, we turned it over in 2021, I think it was, because it was becoming too difficult for me to make uh, get more money. I felt like the people that were most responding to this and helping were all chins, and I felt guilty because I thought Americans should be helping, not the chins. But in all honesty, the chins were just so wonderful, and they gave a lot of money and helped so much. And so we turned it over. My husband was not well, and it was just too difficult for us to keep doing that. So we sent it over, sent all the money over, and turned it over to that. And just in time, because soon after that, the coup happened, and we wouldn't have been able to get that money in safely. So where that is, it's hard to tell because now uh, it's hard to get information, and we don't want to ask too many questions. So we hope that the money is still being. We weren't just giving it to people, we were saying, okay, use it, and then turn it around. And so it was a hands up instead of a hand out process. So
Yeah.
we hope that some of the things are still working. We don't know.
So earlier you mentioned you were homeschooled a bit.
Yeah.
What is your advice regarding education in Chinland? Do you see it right now? It's a ongoing war going on. Like a lot of do you see homeschooling as like a viable or beneficial model for the region?
It's hard for me to say. I really don't know because I think to have a successful homeschooling, you need to have a teacher that knows what they're teaching, you know. So if the parents can homeschool and teach properly, and it worked for me, but I think that um, it's a difficult situation over there. For sure, it's difficult because it's hard for the kids to go to school. I just read that a school got bombed the other day. Things like that is just horrible. And so under those circumstances, I would say, sure, if the parents can teach them, homeschooling is probably better than nothing, but I really don't know.
Kapi, Ruti, real quick, um, you you know of like Chin traditional clothings and stuff like that, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
How do you feel about Chin traditional clothing, especially, girls, women, what they wear? Tell us about how you feel.
Oh, I think it's beautiful. The clothing is wonderful. Um, I don't have anything on right now, but I usually do. I have that's one. But um, I think that when I first came to the States, I wore chin clothing a lot. People always admired what I wore, and they said, "Where's that from?" And I'd show them how it was woven and so on. And I still do that. I think it's beautiful, beautiful clothing. Um, I'm glad to see that a lot of the Chin girls still wear that, maybe just to go to special events. I know that they also look very chic and in modern clothing, but I'm always happy to see them wearing Chin. I think it's good to preserve culture, and I also think it's very good for Chin people to remember their language. It's I appreciate it. I tried to teach my daughter some Chin, and she learned a couple songs, and now just last week she said, "I really wish I should have learned more Chin." She said, "Maybe someday I can go there," and that would be, I think, a goal if Burma ever opens up.
Thank you, thank you. So, I have the last question for you. Right
Okay.
now, obviously, there's a revolution going on across Burma. What message would you like to give to the Chin people, both those living in Chinland who are also fighting for their rights, and those around the world? And if you
That's
could,
a
Kapi, if you could answer it in Lai, that would be
okay. Oh boy. Let me say it in English first because I don't know if I know all the words, okay? Um, First of all, I think that it's such a difficult situation. Right now, we see so many wars going on, Ukraine, Gaza, lots of horrible things in Burma as well. And that's been going on for a while. And it's heartbreaking to see so much devastation and people being moved out of their homes. And it's got to be very scary. Right now, I'm thinking of all my friends in Hakka and what they must be thinking, what's going to happen next. But they have a very good attitude. I think I worry more than maybe they do. I don't know. I see them going nothing doing and uh, all laughing and having fun, and that's so important too. I think it's good to keep the mood good, and I think that as far as the people here in the States, well, let me go back a little bit. I think that in Burma, nothing's going to happen unless nothing good is going to happen unless people can come together and um, do. They need to all be pulling on the same side. They can't have, this group thinking this and this group thinking that and not working together, And I just, my heart is sick when I think about what's going on there. And I worry so much. I stay awake at night. And I wish there was something that we could do that would help. I would say stay patient, stay strong, believe in God. I think that things will deliver. Um, I I think that bad things come to bad people. So maybe eventually it'll all work out. I don't know. If you want me to say something in Chin about that, atu chanchu nancha chan harungai si cha kan mazong America lain kawapa lagi man itsun nan kong kan ruat zung sal nan cha thakan cham mun kata rat nakin nan cha vil der rat kotzen thakan cham zung sal mi se kanula kapa chu anung chen an simveka ha keman itsun mo atua nunti lau chak an ma cha afoi deu sit and van coin an zo kong ha
Tatuk pi kanilom tuk mo.
eh
That concludes our interview with Pi Ruti. It has truly been an honor to spend time with you and hear your incredible stories. Pi Ruti, your Hakka accent is far better than mine. I have to admit that. And I only wish we had more time to continue this conversation, but for now, we must bring it to a close. So to our audience, thank you for watching. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms to stay updated with future interviews and stories and beyond. And until next time, thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you, Kalom.